So, welcome to this Thursday class on the Bartenieff Fundamental Principle of Rotation. Some of you have seen me play with this thing before, some of you haven't. So, it's a nice way of bringing us into the idea of gradated rotation, which is what I'd like to talk about a bit today. So this one object opens up into this long spirally piece. So it's just one piece of metal that has this constant flow in it. And I can take it off my hand so you can see it. So we have this image of the spiral in the middle, and we have this kind of coil around it. And then if I squash it, it'll go back to a ring again. There we go. It's very satisfying. If you're into geometry, it's like, oh. Okay, so we can think of many forms of rotation, and I'm just going to talk us through them very simply. So please stand up. So really simply, rotation includes turning. So just go ahead and do some turning. Turning around your central axis. And we can have spinning also as part of our turning repertoire. And we can also think about twisting. So you can think about twisting and untwisting. And a twist somehow hits the end range of your anatomy. You get to a certain point and your bones just wouldn't go anymore. And you can find it not connected to the ground, or you can find a twist connected to the ground, you know? Turning of the head, twisting of the limbs, having a little play with that. So we can also think about spiraling as being a little bit more ongoing, where we might spiral inwards or unwind outwards. So a bit of free play on that idea of spiraling in, unwinding, and the possibilities of that as an idea. Through one arm, so I'm tracing along a diagonal, a figure of 8 pattern where I'm not getting stuck at the end of some sort of twist. I'm not having to kind of reinitiate. So here we are in this notion of gradated rotation. And I've got a little weight shift in my lower body, sideways and forwards. And I can take that same diagonal if I want with the other arm. Crossing my midline, finding a fall. So your spine can also condense a little bit. Head can come off center. Finding a weight shift forward and backwards. And you can find the other arm. So finding a right high to left low diagonal if you want, with this figure of 8. Carving the space around you. And you can find it with the other arm. And so when you have an arm leading, the other side is not entirely passive. It's still involved somehow a little bit with the counter tension. Also its own smaller joining in of this internal external rotation. as your active arm is adducting, abducting, not so much flexing and extending, but the elbow is soft. And you can make that a little bit smaller and just come to this front part of the kinester, taking a little shift with this gradated rotation now more apparent in the hands and the forearms. So gradated rotation might help us free up our flow, or we might free up our flow to find gradated rotation. So I'll do a bit more of that later. So just wind your way down to the ground. Let's take a little heel rock, so anchoring on the bones of the heels, finding this sitting, to feel sitting bones and that relationship of heels anchoring into the floor to find a rock on those knobbly bones of the pelvis. Noticing what the spine does there. And then you can lie down. Take that rock onto the ground. So finding an initiation from the heels and feeling this traveling through the legs into the pelvis, so the pelvis can rock. Allowing the spine to be mobilized by this rock so that the skull can nod. And if you want to bend your knees a little bit to find this, go ahead and also explore bending the knees. And the arms are heavy, the hands aren't helping push you along. And then slow it down and take a moment to just pause on the ground, feeling the support of the ground coming up to meet you when you take a little pause. And then please bend your knees so your feet are flat on the floor. And we'll spend some time attending to how the pelvis can mobilize in little circles and how the skull can mobilize in order to feel a relationship between the head and the tail. And we'll build that up a little slowly. So first of all, with the pelvis, if you tip your pelvis a little bit more towards your tailbone, finding a little arch in the lower back, you can then map the edge of your pelvis round to one side so that your pelvis is then more tucked under. And carry on mapping the edge of your pelvis, the top of the sacrum, the side of the other ilia, finding a bit more pressure back towards tailbone. So circling pelvis on the ground in such a way that you can sense the pressure changing of the bones of the pelvis in relationship to the floor. And if you feel like your movement is really big and you're kind of using a lot of muscular force to make it happen, you can make it smaller. It can be a bit smaller, a bit simpler. And obviously, you might feel parts of your knees getting involved to do this, or maybe some parts of your ribcage are also moving a little bit, but it's fine. And then going in the other direction. And releasing the skull, releasing through the jaw. Take it a little slower. And then take a pause. Sensing your weight on the ground, sensing the breath. And then bringing your attention to your skull. Bring your attention first to the tip of your nose and draw some circles with your nose in the air. And as you do this, the contact with your skull and the back of the floor keeps changing. And then shift your attention to the back of the skull. And noticing the contact of the back of the skull in this changing circular relationship. And make it small, make it a bit lazy, a bit luxurious. We're mobilizing the top of the skull and the top of the spine, this atlanto-occipital joint, and a bit of the cervical vertebrae as well. Going in the other direction. It might help to start the circle off by imagining a circle of the nose and see what happens in the back of the skull. Or maybe you can go straight to mapping a circle with the back of the skull first. And the breath is easy. There's no particular instructions of using the breath here, except to simply breathe. And then take a little pause. Maybe open your jaw a few times, take a little wriggle. And then taking your attention back to the pelvis, finding these circles of the pelvis. And now including the head, so finding the same direction of skull and pelvis. Keeping it small. No need to use the hip flexors a huge amount, it's more pelvic floor, lower abdominals. And finding circles the other way, tracing back of sacrum, different parts of the skull. Eyes are soft or closed, sense of weight of the brain, weight of the eyeballs, weight of the organs of the belly. Lovely. Then go ahead and turn the head to the left. Allow the right side of the pelvis to get a bit heavier. And then bring the skull back to the center, pelvis to the center. Head rolls to the right. And taking the pelvis slightly over to the left, so maybe the right side of the pelvis comes off a little bit. And we're not taking it very far, it's just a sensing into how skull can go one way, pelvis can go the other way. And how the spine is helping accommodate that change. So each vertebrae doesn't have a huge range of motion, but the whole length of the spine together absolutely does. Taking a couple more of those spiraling relationships of pelvis to skull. And our phrasing is pretty even. Not adding any accents yet or any particular abrupt changes. We're in this sense of gradual change, gradated flow through these body parts. Nice. And then release skull. Take the legs long. And in your own way, rolling on the ground, finding it initiating from the tailbone or the pelvis or the skull. So I might turn my head and that rolls me over. Or I might start at my pelvis and that brings the rest of my spine and my skull with it. Turning head to roll. And so this time skull and pelvis are going more in the same direction rather than in opposition. And they might roll at the same time. Head and skull together. Or it might be that skull is passive and pelvis begins, and then it joins in. So 3 different options here of head leading, pelvis leading, or both leading together. And playing with whatever rolling comes. You might find it useful with initiating from the head to move your eyes, even if your eyes are closed, to use the movement of the eyes to turn the head. Or you might be motivated by what you hear. Your ears start to lead you. Taking a few more moments to roll. Trying to stay with this initiation of head or tail. It might become really tempting to start using your legs or reaching through the arms, but keep it more about the skull and the pelvis and the torso for now. And how can this rolling also be with this sense of leisureliness, not kind of rushing through it or fighting against the floor, trying to lift yourself up. It's about connecting with the floor, surfaces melting in, parting with the floor. And then please bring yourself to sit. And with your fingers, see if you can find your shoulder blade. So it'll take a bit of a stretch to get around there. So everyone's shoulder blades are a different size. And then with your own shoulder blades, you might find there are parts that you can't feel because there's loads of muscle and tendons over them, and that's quite normal. And remembering that the shoulder blade comes actually quite high and joins with our collarbone, and you can give a bit of excavating to the collarbone. And then finding where the top of the shoulder blade joins in with the top of the arm. And you can carry on palpating down the bone to the 2 bones of the lower arms, the radius and ulna. And then you have the hand. You can say hello to the palm. And we can consider this connection between the palm to the shoulder blade. We were doing it earlier, but I'm now specifying a kind of relationship between the proximal joints and the spine. So you can do this sitting or standing. I'll talk us through it for now. In your mind's eye, or also with your hands, you can trace that the thumb connects through to the skull. You might stroke that along your body and give that sense of image of a line of the thumb going to the skull. And then the middle finger, let's trace it so it joins just below the shoulder blades to the middle of the back. So around the middle of the thoracic vertebrae. Let's give that the image. And then let's imagine the little finger connecting, tracing to the tailbone. So you might want to touch these on your own body, so you're kind of reminding yourself of where they are. Little finger to tailbone, thumb to head. That's all we're going to kind of play with, and the middle finger's there just to remind us of the centre of the spine. Go ahead and map that with the other side, so finding this shoulder blade, where bone becomes muscle. You feel the skin as well as the fat. These different protective mechanisms for our lungs. And then we have the collarbones. And then joining around to this shoulder girdle, to breastbone, to upper arm, humerus, and radius and ulnar, these knobbly bones where they all meet at the thing that we call the elbow, and then down to the hands. And we can visualize the connection of the thumb to the skull, middle finger, maybe to the solar plexus or to the thoracic spine, and little finger to the tailbone. Okay, so thumbs to skull, little fingers to tailbone. Go ahead and play with what that relationship might be for yourself. These parts might come towards each other. It might be about mobilizing all together. But start to play with a relationship of upper limbs, of head and arms, in relationship to spine. And it might pass from one hand to the other hand. The spine might flex, it might twist. Might find a bit more lateral condensing. Little finger and tailbone might be very close to each other, maybe further away. So take a few more minutes for yourself in this relationship of palm into shoulder blade, into skull, into spine. Ongoing pathways that keep maybe shifting between your attention of where is initiating, where is leading, where is following. And it might take you really low to the ground, it might take you sitting. Great. And gradually bring yourself back to the screen so you can see me. I'm going to show you a little thing. So carrying on these relationships between parts, we'll take our attention now more to the legs. So we can feel this internal, external rotation through the lower legs. You can have them both going in the same direction, and you can also have them both going in or both going out. So I'm playing here with a bit of flexion, extension, rotation, heels coming towards the sitting bones. And away. So playing with that a little bit in your own way. Limbs might slide, they might flex, they might stay extended. And you can use your hands on the ground for a bit of support also if you wish. Might even take some circles on my heels so that my toes are drawing circles and my pelvis is circling. And then I realise that my skull is making a circle on the ceiling, steering through my heels. That could be very small, or it could mean more of me gets involved. Okay, let's play with this on the floor. So, finding internal rotation through the arms and the legs, and then external rotation. And I'm going to join my spine in to flex as I find this internal rotation and then external rotation with an extension through the spine. So twisting the limbs and untwisting and finding this relationship of the proximal joints of the hip sockets and the shoulders in relationship to the spine. And then when you've done that a few times, disaffine it. So arms and legs will take an external rotation. And I was encouraging us to find a flexion through an extension through the spine. Can you find a flex instead? And then internally rotate limbs and find an extension through the spine. Externally rotate the limbs and find this compression of the front space of the kinesphere. Internally rotating the limbs, finding an extension of the spine. And then go back to the first version and see how that feels. And it doesn't have to be huge. If you find that going all the way onto the top of the head is really stressful, don't do it. Take it really small, maybe just lift the chin. You don't even need to take your skull off the ground. But you can still fulfill a really thorough rotation through fingers, palm and arm, into shoulder girdle, into spine. Good, and then just take a little wriggle. And we'll find a more of a body half version of this. So if this was our kind of radial symmetry version where navel center to tail, skull and arms and legs were doing similar kind of activity, now we'll shift the attention to a body half organization. Externally rotating the right side, internally rotating the left leg and the left arm. And then the other way. So I can just easily flow from one side to the other side. And I can make it a bit quicker if I wanted to. And then slow it down again. bringing that attention to skull and pelvis, as well as this rolling of the lengths of the legs, rolling of the lengths of the arms. And then find yourself back in the middle. Inhaling to a big X, rolling to one side, opening onto your front. Coming up into this little Sphinx place here, so pressing through the lower arms. Turning the head, bending your knee, seeing your knee. You can extend the other arm away and find this lizard-like shape. And then extending that same side, compressing the spine to the other side. Little twist. Well, more of a lateral compression here through the spine. And you might even see your hand. It might turn towards your face. So a bit of lizard crawling without going anywhere. Seeing how the spine accommodates this. And then eventually rolling yourself back to your back surface. So we're quickly running through some developmental pattern support for our rotation here. Let's join together the up and the down and the left and the right with a diagonal heel rock. So in this big X place, finding a heel rock just through the left leg and feeling that sequence through to the right shoulder girdle. So head is still nodding, and this information, this movement is traveling left heel, left side of pelvis, joining in the spine, traveling through to that opposite hand. And then switching to the other side, so left leg is heavy, it's passive, right heel is active, sending this movement through the cross-lateral connection of your body, from right lower to left upper. And so the head is still nodding, and maybe the left palm is feeling like it's slightly sliding on the ground, maybe, maybe not. And again, if you need to or want to use a bit of bend of the knee, that's fine. If you have very hypermobile knee joints, it can be useful to add a bit more flexion through the knees. And swapping when you're ready, going between these two long cross-lateral connections. And you might notice that one is more easy than the other, or more familiar somehow. Or you might notice that the movement gets stuck a little bit along the way. It's fine. These exercises, if we call them exercises, are places to play and explore and discover something about today, about this body in this moment. It's not about getting it right. It's about going, how does this feel? What am I doing? What am I not doing? Okay. Then take another reach, take a little pause, take a little wriggle, recuperate however you would like to recuperate. So in the Laban Bartenieff Movement System, this idea of exertion, recuperation could be resting, could be something different to what you were just doing. So we were doing a lot of rocking on our back. Recuperating might be getting like here, or being still, or opening your eyes if they were closed, or running around the room, so recuperation doesn't necessarily mean resting, but it also can. So we're going to carry on doing a bit more of this cross-lateral spiraling stuff to play a bit more with this rotation. And I'd like us to, first of all, do some sitting stuff with this internal, external thing that we just played with on the ground. So we can come back to sitting in this place. And we were here circling on the heels and circling the skull, shifting between right sitting bone, left sitting bone, coming more towards the pubic symphysis, coming more towards back of sacrum, and finding ourselves falling a little bit into the back space. So that will become useful later. But for now, let's find arms extended, internally rotate and externally rotate, and refinding that spine flexing in between. And if you want to sigh or find the voice a little bit, go ahead and do that. So it's up to you whether you initiate from the hands into and the feet into the spine, from the distal ends, or from the top of the skull and the tailbone. That might be useful to play with, that sense of starting at the heels and the hands and the head and the tail. Or maybe you want to start right in the center of the belly, and that's what brings you back. And then the rest of the spine and the limbs carry on. Moving forward a little bit, moving backwards a little bit. And then just let that go. It's not a Martha Graham class, so we don't need to do that forever. Okay, let's go with externally rotating one way, one side, body half, and internally rotating the other side. And your knees might bend and your elbows might bend, and the skull is condensing. So it's a little bit similar to what we found on the ground in our lizard place. You can find more compression, getting small in the kinesphere and then getting big again. And you might feel like you're in some sort of 80s jazz video, that's also fine. And you might change the tempo. See what that does. I feel like I can travel on the ground actually as I do this. I'm definitely advancing. Okay, let's put this into a way of getting down to the floor. So externally rotating one way and internally rotating the other way. Rather than unwinding, I'm going to keep going, finding the ground, taking an arm circle over my head and finding the ground again. And I can carry on rolling to one side, push myself back up to sit. Externally rotating, internally rotating, maybe that leg swings across as well. Let's add that in. So externally rotating, bringing myself up, and I can carry on going down, taking an arm circle and that leg can swing, just bring myself onto my back. Nice. So it's this feeling really easy with falling into the back space. And you can do it without the rest of the participation of the legs. To feel that rolling across the arc of the arms, across the shoulder girdle. And to get up off the floor, I'm exploring how my hand can't see, a sense of rolling across the arm bones to push. So I'm finding the opportunity to push and roll rather than getting stuck here. And I can still push off the back of my hand, but giving yourself that gradated rotation from a closed chain of those muscles, or that organization of the arm, condensing, folding, and pushing. Nice. Okay, let's add on some leg swings. So this little pattern that we had earlier, the head going one way and the knees going the other way, let's take that for now. Let's take a moment to circle the arm and circling it in the opposite direction. Sense of thumb to skull here. Seeing the hand a little bit. So we will do some leg swings in a minute, but this is more of the cross-lateral connection of the arm across and over the head. arcing in a circle around you. And the knees can go the other way, and the head towards the other hand. And the circle crossing the midline, taking it in the other direction. Keeping eyes open, seeing the space, or seeing the hand as it travels around. Cool. And now taking knees one way and the head to the same direction. And let's add in this thigh lift action. So rather than the leg coming off the ground, it's going to slide on the ground. And I show it this way so that you see that as you take that flexion in the hip, that the distance between the heel and the pelvis stays the same. You're not kind of kicking the leg or making it shorter. It's trying to stay at that kind of same angle as you swing the knee across, sliding on the floor. So here we have the knee circling around the hip socket. And I can take my head in the same direction, sense of heart pouring in the direction of that knee. If I wanted to increase the twist of the spine, I could take my head in the opposite direction and feel a different kind of stretch through the thoracic vertebrae. That would be another option to play with. But we'll do head in the same way in order to take an arm circle over the head and keep that leg swinging behind you, and then opening the arm. I've got an opposition going on in my upper and my lower. Arm circles across, leg. This is more of a visual, it's quite hard to explain. Thigh lift, arm circle over the top as the leg swings behind, arm circles back again as the knee comes up. Skull can roll, arm is circling, using a bit of pressure on the ground. Back to the center. Take a little recuperation from that. So let's put a few more things together. Let's go knee drop, thigh lift. So this is the same, arm circling over the top, and here, pushing yourself to sit. Coming into the ground, and back to knee drop, thigh lift. Arm and toes circle, push yourself to sit. And then we'll slide across the back of the pelvis, finding the other way back down to the ground. And you're here. Knee drop, thigh lift with the right thigh, right arm circles over the top, carrying on, head circling in space, shifting across to the other side, bringing yourself back into the ground, and you're down. Knees to the right, left leg swings, left arm circle, pressing right side, shifting to left side, over, and you're down to the ground. Yeah, having a play with that, right and left. So it's a combination of these different arcing pathways in space, with a weight shift and a level change. Coming out of the ground, coming back into the ground. Sliding the foot on the ground. Finding the weight of the pelvis. And if you're making your own version up, that's totally fine. If you're like, I'm not sure whether I'm doing it right, it's fine. Totally fine to be kind of digging into your own version of this with some sort of combination of shifting and rolling with the space available to you. Okay, and then when you've done it the last time to the other side, so you're more or less even, let's add in another weight shift, another kind of level change to this. So we'll go knee drop, leg swing, arm circle, shift of weight, violet. So you're coming on to, from this place here, shifting around, coming onto the shin, and then reversing back into the ground. Knee jump, leg swing, arm circle, head comes with you, pelvis comes with you. And then you can reverse your way back into the ground. Side, knee drop, arm circle, pressing into the ground. Here I'm shifting, that knee is sliding and I'm shifting onto the foot. And then pelvis is coming back in space as I find the back space of my inner sphere to return. Nice. And the next time you come to the little weight support on hand and shin, just step through, bring yourself to stand. And then let's come back into the floor, finding that shape again, shifting around and rolling back onto the ground. So depending on the amount of space you have around you, you might be making some new variation of this. Up and round. And then to come back into the floor, finding a cross-lateral shape here of hand to foot, and then turning internally with the hand to arm here. Head can sink a little bit, finding back the pelvis, easing your way into the ground. So once you're up, in order to come back down again, finding this shape here, and then you can turn, arm in, find the back space, and find another little version of leg swing to bring you into the ground. And the next time you find yourself standing, have a little walk around the space to play with how walking feels. Can you feel these spirals through the arms? And then go ahead and refine a relationship between your thumb and head, little finger and tail. And begin to explore some relationship again of turning, twisting, spiraling for yourself. So we found body half, one side might twist into the other side. You might want to explore that pattern that we did on the floor now, standing. We did a lot with arm circling. So how does the arm circle relate to you spiraling now? Seeing the hand in the space. This figure of 8 pattern might come back again. And so not getting stuck anywhere. Once you've twisted only so far as you can go, maybe you untwist and find somewhere else to go. Turning your head to turn the rest of your body. Leading through tailbone. Relating thumb to skull. Bringing limbs closer to the center of your kinesphere or further away. Taking one more minute to explore some of this. Spiraling, turning, twisting with a sense of gradated ongoingness to it. Maybe it's a sense of overlapping circles. One begins and one keeps following. Gradually take yourself back down to the floor. So you can find a little heel rock, leaving spiraling alone, connecting to your vertical throughness from lower to upper, and taking a side through the mouth. And then take a moment of stillness, allowing your body to be heavy. Sometimes a lot of spiraling and turning can be quite activating for the vestibular system, so it's quite common to feel a little bit sick or a little bit dizzy. Not that that's the aim or the goal or a good sign in any way, just that it's also quite normal. And then gently roll yourself to one side, and we'll come up to sit and have a little chat together.